everyone, welcome back to another video. For today's video, we have a very in-depth guide on elemental reactions on Genshin Impact. This is sort of an extension to the team building video because people have been asking me on what best elemental reactions are and who's the best character for what, so I figured I would make this guide explaining all the elemental reactions so that you can choose which ones you like best and which ones are more suited for your characters. We have timestamps in the description below if you'd like to skip to a certain reaction, but in order to get the most out of this video, I highly suggest watching it in order. Hopefully you're able to understand every elemental reaction and can make decisions based on the characters that you have so you can progress faster in the game, and it helps out your account a lot. A lot of this information can be found on the Genshin wiki and other guides. I will link the sources where I found most of this information in the description if you'd like to check them out there, but other than that, sit back, relax, grab a snack, and enjoy the video. Speaking of snacks, have you ever been super hungry and craved for something new and exciting? Well, you're in luck because this video is sponsored by toyotreat and Sakuraco. Experience Japan from the comfort of your own homes through toyotreats and Sakuraco's snack boxes. toyotreat is a fun and exclusive Japanese snack box featuring unique and exclusive flavors straight from Japan. Look at these absolutely delicious goodies. Each box is filled with a variety of full-size Japanese snack items like limited edition Kit Kats, unique flavored Japanese chips, and occasional Japanese sodas that are only available in Japan for a limited time, which means you'll want to take advantage of this special offer. And for Sakuraco, it is a monthly Japanese artisan snack box that supports local Japanese snack makers. Each box comes with 20 traditional, authentic, and artisan Japanese snacks, including Japanese teas and special Japanese tableware. This month's theme for toyotreat is Snacktastic Halloween. There are a ton of spooky, fun, and wacky snacks to try with unique flavors. This Halloween theme box is meant to capture the thrill and excitement found in Japan's haunted holiday. Do not miss out on the spooky and sweet experience and get a taste of a Japanese Halloween in this exclusive toyotreat box. I mean, just look at these goodies. I have never seen snacks as unique as these before, and also the flavors do not disappoint. For Sakuraco, this month's theme is Colors of Kyoto. As autumn arrives in the city of Kyoto, Sakuraco has created a box filled with Kyoto's fall delicacies. They combine seasonal flavors with cultural heritage so you can enjoy many authentic snacks and treats with fall flavors that capture the essence of autumn in Kyoto, along with the beauty of cultural traditions. It was such a great experience to try all these delicious treats and get a glimpse of the unique snack culture of Japan. You will definitely want to taste as well. This month's snack highlights include the Kyoto Arare, Kitsune Senbei, Yuzu Dorayaki, and Matcha Chocolate Crunch, which is my personal favorite. The box also includes sencha or tea from Kyoto, which pairs perfectly with all the delicious snacks. This month's box also includes the Floral Gamon Yunomi, which is this beautiful Japanese teacup that you can use to enjoy your tea or have as a cute little keepsake. If you're confused with all the names or can't read Japanese, do not worry. The snack boxes include super helpful guides to let you know what you're eating, but not only that, it also includes the history and significance of each snack in Japanese culture. Read more about folktales and traditions and so much more inside the little booklets. The toyotreat one even tells you which anime is best to watch for Halloween. It also tells you any dietary restrictions or ingredients that the food may include, so do not fear if you have any allergies. There is information regarding that, and there are plenty of snacks that are vegan friendly. I absolutely love toyotreat and Sakuraco subscription boxes. It's like getting a birthday surprise each month full of goodies that you would never expect. These boxes are filled with tons of goodies that I tend to munch on while playing Genshin or just chilling and editing. I love branching out and trying new flavors, and if you're like me, check out the link in the description or the pinned comment to get your own monthly box. You can use the code AMBER to save on your first order and support the channel. Treat yourself or a loved one to the taste of Japan and explore a new realm of delicious snacks with toyotreat and Sakuraco. Let me know if you do try out these boxes for yourself. I would love to hear your thoughts about it. I hope you enjoy it just as much as I did. Thank you so much toyotreat and Sakuraco for sponsoring this video. Now let us get back to the video. So to give a brief overview of what are elemental reactions, it's when one character applies an element and then another character applies an element on top of that. This happens with most elemental combinations except for a few of them. I will make sure to explain every single one of them so that you know which elemental reactions do work and which ones don't, such as applying hydro and then pyro to get a vaporize reaction, whereas some reactions don't work where if you apply dendro and geo, nothing really happens. If you check weapons, you might notice that some of them have a substat that says Elemental Mastery. What this does, it increases the damage of the character that is applying the second elemental reaction. For example here, Mona is applying Hydro to the enemy and that's the first element. And then Bennett applies the second element, and that's the one whose character scales off of the Elemental Mastery. Whereas if Bennett was the one to apply the element first and then Mona, then it would be based on Mona's elemental mastery. Depending on the order that you apply the elemental reactions, you will want to choose artifacts and also weapons based on which character is doing that. For example, the character usually applying the second element is the one that wants to have more elemental mastery than the one applying the first element. There are lots of ways you can gain elemental mastery. Some of them might have an ascension passive, but also in your artifact substats. More specifically, the sands and the circlet will be your go-to ones in terms of building elemental mastery, as well as a weapon that has elemental mastery as its substat. As for elemental reactions, there are two kinds of elemental reactions: amplifying reactions and transformative reactions. To start off, here are the amplifying reactions. The first one being vaporize, where your damage can crit. There are two ways you can apply vaporize. One of them has a damage multiplier of 1.5 and the other one has a damage multiplier of 2. In order to get the 1.5 multiplier, you first need to apply hydro to your enemy and then apply pyro. Whereas if you want the multiplier of 2, you would first need to apply pyro to your enemy and then apply hydro. It's recommended that you apply pyro first and then hydro to get the most out of your damage, which is common with a lot of characters that have bursts that have the ability to one-shot, such as Child or other characters like Yelan as well. Our next reaction that can also crit is going to be melt. Similar to vaporize, you can also apply this in different ways. However, the damage scales differently based on the order. In order to get the 1.5 multiplier, you would need to apply pyro first to your enemy and then cryo. For the 2 times multiplier, you need to apply cryo first and then pyro. Melt also works really well with frozen. I'll elaborate more on frozen later, but it's best that you have the frozen status and then apply it, and that way you can ensure that you are triggering the reaction. The cool thing about melt and vaporize is that your character level does not matter as much as the other reactions, because your elemental reactions can crit, and it usually just depends on weapon level or artifact level, and your damage is multiplied like that. Elemental mastery will boost the base damage without the amplifier yet, so you can still build elemental mastery on those characters. Now it is time for our other category of elemental reactions. These are transformative reactions. These ones do scale off of character level, so if you are proccing these elemental reactions, it's best that your characters are maximum leveled, or more specifically the characters that are doing the elemental reaction and not just applying the primary element. So the first one we have is swirl. Swirl only works with a certain amount of elements, those ones being hydro, cryo, pyro, and also electro. As for geo and dendro, they do not work with swirl. So the way swirl works is you apply an element to an enemy and then apply anemo. And as you can see, all the other enemies have that element applied to them as well. This works really well with large groups of enemies and if you need to apply an element quickly, and can work in the spiral abyss when you have a bunch of singular enemies. Here it is working with pyro, but swirl is really best in settings where there are multiple enemies at once. As for our next elemental reaction that is similar to swirl, we have crystallize. The key features of crystallize are similar to anemo, except this time it's with a geo unit and it does something a little different. In order to trigger crystallize, you need to apply an element to an enemy, and then what you would do is apply geo. But as you can see on the ground, there is this shard. When you pick it up, you will gain a crystallized shield, which is this purple thing around me right now. Now this shield will change color depending on which element you used first. For example, if you apply cryo first, and then apply geo, now the shields are going to be blue. The same thing works with pyro, and now the shield is red. This also works with hydro too. The strength of this shield depends on the character that is triggering the reaction. Also note that when you do trigger crystallize and you apply the element and then apply geo, the element that pre-existed on the enemy has now disappeared, which means you need someone or a character with a skill that can constantly apply this other element. For example, Rosaria's burst, which constantly applies cryo, is really good for the crystallize reaction. This usually means someone who is an off-field support and can always apply that element consistently so that your geo character can trigger crystallize all the time. Now we have our next elemental reaction. This one is electrocharged. Electrocharged is pretty simple because it can work in multiple ways. All it is it combines electro and hydro together. So the way to trigger electrocharged is you need to apply hydro to an enemy and then electro. However, this also works in the same order where you apply electro first and then apply hydro. What this does is it results in electro damage being dealt over time. If this reaction is dealt when there are other enemies around, they will get the hydro status. For example, here's how it works. If I apply hydro to these enemies and then apply electro to them, other enemies around will get the hydro status and not the electrocharge status. The strength of the reaction depends on the character that is triggering the electrocharge reaction. So if I applied electro with Beto and then Mona, the strength of the reaction would depend on Mona's elemental mastery and not Beto's. Personally, I really love using electrocharge with swirl. I run a taser comp for one of the sides of the abyss and it is so much fun because electrocharge can stun some enemies and prevents them from doing some of their attacks, which can be really helpful in certain situations. The next elemental reaction that we have is frozen. It's really simple. You just have to freeze enemies using cryo or hydro. It can work in any order, so you can apply hydro first and then cryo, it will freeze the enemy, or you can choose to apply cryo first and then apply hydro. This only works on enemies that are not immune to cryo, and you can't freeze any bosses. The frozen effect can be broken with heavy attacks like claymores, where you can see that shatter effect, and this is an elemental reaction called shatter. It just doesn't show up though, but any heavy attacks like plunging attacks, claymores, or geo attacks can destroy the frozen effect, and it deals physical damage. It also scales off of the person that's doing the shattering, so let's see here. If I freeze this enemy and shatter with Fremine, it will depend on Fremine's elemental mastery. To be honest, it's not the strongest reaction, but it is helpful if you do need to freeze enemies, and you can also use swirl with this because you're able to group up frozen enemies and take them out easier. The next reaction we have is overloaded. Overloaded can be done in any order. You can apply pyro and then apply electro to these enemies. And as you can see, when overload is triggered, the enemies will bounce back a little bit. These will knock back really light enemies, but also sometimes it can knock them further from you and you won't be able to attack them as easily. However, when this is done, it applies pyro to the surrounding enemies, and it's sometimes able to break shields that are made of geo, and this will also be able to break frozen enemies. Here you can trigger overload this other way, and it also does damage. Just remember that the damage is based off the character that is doing the elemental reaction and not just applying the first element. So in this case, if I apply electro first, Lisa is the applicator, and then Yanfei is the one triggering the reaction. If you're not a fan of using pyro and having enemies knock back, you can also try superconduct. Superconduct works best with physical teams. It's where you use cryo and electro, and you can apply it in any order, but the result is that the enemy's physical damage resistance goes down. Here you can see that I'm going to apply cryo and then apply electro, and the superconduct reaction was triggered. This deals cryo AoE damage, and again, the resistance for physical damage is decreased, and this lasts for about 12 seconds. Again, you can apply it in any order. I personally really liked this team when I was building my physical Rosaria, but this was more suited towards early game players, and because characters for this reaction are pretty accessible. If you have a physical DPS, I highly suggest running a superconduct team. Although physical damage isn't the most used thing at the moment, it's still really helpful to have superconduct if you are running a physical DPS. Now moving on to our dendro reactions, we have burning. Burning also works in any order as long as you apply pyro and dendro. So the way this works is if I apply dendro and then apply pyro, you can see that this burning effect happens and the characters consistently take pyro damage. It basically is pyro damage over time, but the burning effect stops once dendro is not active anymore. So even if I do have dendro here and then apply pyro and it's burning, it will only really last as long as there is dendro. Now because I am fighting on grass, it does last a little longer, but most of the time you are not fighting on grass if you're fighting in the spiral abyss, so burning would only last as long as you have dendro. So having a consistent dendro applicator like Kinich is really helpful for burning reactions. When you apply burning, the pyro status stays on the enemy for a really long time, so if you need to trigger other reactions that involve pyro, burning is a really good one to start with. So as you can see here, if I apply burning, the pyro status lasts on the enemy for quite a while, so it will help me set up other reactions. This works for things like melt. But burning is only really good if you have a Dendro DPS or someone that can constantly apply Dendro to that enemy. For the next Dendro reaction, we have Bloom. The way Bloom works is if you apply a Dendro and Hydro to an enemy in any order, it will create a Bloom core on the ground. As you can see here, I'm going to apply Hydro and then I'm going to apply Dendro. You see these little green things on the ground? These are Dendro cores. So after a while, these Dendro cores will explode and it can deal damage to you and the enemy. These Dendro cores can be used in various reactions such as hyperbloom and burgeon, which I will elaborate on later. But in the most simple form, Dendro and Hydro equals Bloom. You can only have a maximum of 5 Dendro cores on the ground, and the moment you add more, the other ones will explode and they will deal AoE damage. It's really good to have a consistent Dendro and Hydro applicator when you do a Bloom team, or someone that's an off-field support that can always apply one of the elements. The cool thing you can do with Bloom is apply electro to the Dendro cores and it will create something called hyperbloom. You've probably seen lots of hyperbloom teams because it's super popular to do and it deals a great amount of damage depending on who's activating the hyperbloom. So I'm going to apply Dendro and then Hydro to the enemy and create a bunch of Dendro cores. Then apply electro, and as you can see, the little Dendro cores turn into missiles and go and hit the enemy. These missiles will deal AoE damage, but also can deal damage to you. The damage dealt is based on the character that triggers the reaction's elemental mastery, so my best tip for you is to have someone that's always applying one of the elements so that you always have these cores on the ground. Also, a constant electro applicator would be really helpful like Fischl or Raiden, so you can always trigger hyperbloom. Another thing you can do with the bloom reaction is apply pyro to your Dendro cores and create burgeon. Burgeon is a reaction that uses bloom and pyro to create a reaction similar to hyperbloom, except this time instead of turning into missiles, it just explodes on the spot. Here is an example of that. I'm going to apply Hydro and then apply my Dendro, and now I have bloom cores on the ground. But I'm going to apply pyro and you can see the burgeon reaction happening and the Dendro cores exploded on the spot. Here I'll create more Dendro cores and show you again. When I applied pyro, the Dendro cores exploded and then dealt damage to the enemy. You can also take damage as well, so be careful. Again, you'll want a good Dendro and Hydro applicator so you're constantly applying bloom, and then a DPS that can do burgeon. As long as you are consistently creating these Dendro cores and applying Dendro, burgeon is a pretty easy reaction to master. For our last few Dendro reactions, we have quicken and also aggravate and spread. These reactions are very specific to Electro and Dendro, and the reaction you get is dependent on the order which you apply the elements. The first one we have is quicken, where you can apply Dendro and Electro in whatever order, but all this does is applies the enemy with a quicken state. You can tell that an enemy is in a quicken state based on the green particles around the enemy. Then if you decide to apply another element to this quickened enemy, it will increase the damage of that element. The effect of the quicken state only lasts for 7 seconds, so it's best to take advantage of what you have. The reactions that happen with Dendro and Electro after you trigger quicken are called aggravate and spread. So this enemy is in the quicken state, and if I decide to apply Electro to this quickened enemy, you can see that it's triggering aggravate. This increases Electro damage dealt to the enemy. But then if I apply Dendro to the quickened enemy, you can see that it triggers spread. Spread increases the Dendro damage dealt to the enemy, which works really well if you have a consistent Dendro damage dealer, or a Dendro DPS. So that was it for the elemental reaction portion. Here is just a quick look at the characters that I like for every single reaction. These are just based on my preferences and my experience playing. I don't also have every single character, but based on the characters I do like playing, here are my suggestions for every single element. So for the vaporize reaction, I really like Hu Tao, and I run her with Yelan or Xingqiu because they can apply pyro and hydro together and deal a lot of amplified damage. As for melt, I really like Klee and another cryo applicator, someone like Diona or Rosaria, but I don't do a lot of melt teams and I mostly just use Klee for vaporize. As for swirl, I really like using Kazuha because he can swirl a bunch of enemies together and suck them all up and group them. And then any characters that have an off-field support like Kokomi that can constantly apply hydro is really good for swirl, and also Raiden Shogun. For crystallize, I have to go with Navia. She is my favorite for crystallize because her burst can always apply Geo, and if I run her with Albedo, she's always going to be generating crystallize shields with an off-field support like Kokomi or Fischl or Raiden. For electro, electrocharged, I really have to choose Raiden for this one. I run my taser comp with Nubilet, Farina, Raiden, and Kokomi or Kazuha depending on who I need, and this taser comp works really well and I can clear a bunch of content with it, and it's super easy to run because most of them are off-field supports except for my DPS. Now I'm not much of a frozen comp person, but if I wanted to go with a frozen comp I would choose Rosaria for her burst. I really would like to have a Layla copy. It would be so helpful in a lot of frozen teams, or a Charlotte because I do not have her. My Rosaria is my go-to for a frozen comp. You could also try Kaya because of his burst, and characters like Yelan or Xingqiu for a lot of Hydra application. As for Overloaded, a lot of people associate Overload with Chevreuse, but that's because she was made for Overload comps. Some other options for Overload could also be Xiangling, but just keep in mind that Overload does make enemies go backwards, so you might want someone that can group up enemies together, and since Xiangling's burst sort of will make enemies bounce outwards, it's best to have someone that can swirl them up together like a Venti. For burning, you know that my go-to is Kinich because Kinich is made for burning and burgeon. He applies dendro damage all the time and is really good for that. If you pair him with Xiangling, that works too, or honestly any character that applies dendro for a long time, even the dendro MC works. I have been using her since I do not have Nahida just yet, but once I do get Nahida I will probably build her, but most likely more for a hyperbloom comp and not a burning comp. For bloom, it's best to have a character that's an off-field support like Kokomi. You could also use Kave because it forces his skill to pop the dendro cores and it will deal damage right away. But if you do like bloom, it's best that you invest in a Nilou. I do not have her, but I'm waiting for her rerun because Nilou is made for bloom teams. For burgeon, Kinich also works really well along with Xiangling, and I did hear that Toma is pretty good for burgeon. Any hydro applicator that deals off-field hydro damage works too, like Xingqiu, but if you are running burgeon or burning, Kinich is your go-to for that. Hyperbloom is one of the most used teams. I like Nubilet for my Hyperbloom team, or Farina in it as well, and Raiden for her off-field electro damage. I do not run any quicken teams at the moment, but Clorand is a good go-to for that because of her passive. And for spread, Tainari is a popular one for that because he always applies dendro damage with his short burst cooldown and also his charge shots. So those are the characters that I recommend for each reaction. Again, it's best that you build characters and build teams that you want to play with elemental reactions that you enjoy. If you are conflicted whether to choose the meta or your own preferences, always choose your own preferences because always following the meta can be really exhausting, and it's just best that you do something that you like to play on Genshin. Like if you really love to run frozen comps, for example, and the meta is telling you to run hyperbloom, it's still possible to clear content with a frozen comp the way you build it, as long as you are having fun and able to enjoy playing Genshin. Also build characters around reactions that you like a lot, and a lot of it is trial and error too, depending on which character is good for something. But if you do just get a new character, it's always best to look up a build guide for them so that you know which teams that they can build around. But a lot of characters are pretty flexible and can work around many teams, so whichever one you feel most comfortable playing with. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. Hopefully it was able to explain reactions to you. Again, my references are in the description, so if you need to check that out for a little bit more information, please go ahead. If you have questions or suggestions, put them in the comments. I will try to get to all of them. Let me know if you found this video helpful, and thank you so much for all your support. Have a wonderful day, good luck on your polls, and I'll see you in our next video. Bye!